We broadcast this show every weekday morning from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., the only one that gives you meaningful conversations. The next conversation we want to have is on public-private partnerships. So the president recently talked about PPPs. He said, see this Galana Kulalu thing that has been start, stop. It is going to be start and not stop. Why? Because we are going into PPPs on this and it'll make it work. You see this water provision thing that we've been talking about, oh, water, we don't have water, it takes forever. It's going to be water pouring out of your taps. Why? PPP. And very many other things. Roads, infrastructure, very many things we're going to do on PPP. Now, the Director General of the Directorate of Public-Private Partnerships at the National Treasury and Economic Planning is Christopher Kirigua. He is our guest. How we welcome him is the way we welcome our guests. He was going to hear the day's proverb.
Okay. We're still in the country of Namibia, whose capital is we know which. You know, I'm going to pronounce it once a day. I'm not going to repeat it again.
Whose capital is a drink?
It's a drink, yes. Yes. It's a bottled drink. Yes. Frothy bottled drink. It is the one who lies by the fire who feels the heat. That's today's proverb.
It's the one who lies by the fire who feels the heat. And Ndu, your translation was the one who doesn't.
The one who doesn't lie by the fire will not feel the heat.
Who does not feel the heat. Okay. Chris Kirigua, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the hot seat of Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. You're sitting on the fire, so you should feel the heat.
It is hot.
That proverb, though, what's your direct interpretation of it? It's the one who sits by the fire who feels the heat.
I'll say it's the one with the role to make a difference is the one that has the big responsibility. So certainly with the role of PPP and the requirements, and especially with the fiscal challenges of the country, I am sitting on the heat.
To whom much is given.
Much is expected.
Much will also be expected. You've been in this role for what now, 2 years?
2 years.
2 years. And this was your first foray into public service.
Indeed.
How has that transition been?
It's been an exciting one, a very exciting one. We've been able to make quite a number of achievements in the PPP arena. Kenya in 2021, December, changed the PPP regulatory framework. We put in a new law. The new law in Kenya actually is a very different, it makes it much more friendly to investors to be able to participate in the PPP area. Kenya is one of the few countries globally with timelines on the public sector on delivery of projects under PPP. Yeah, so that was a big transformation. We also enhanced the processes within government. We had about 13 approval processes. We streamlined that to about 3 without compromising on governance to be able to fast track the implementation of PPPs. Another element we were able to achieve on the law was also in terms of scaling up local content. Scaling up the local content in public infrastructure will enable Kenyan companies to be able to do projects in other markets and other jurisdictions, and also boost production within the country.
Chris, let's just do some definitions here, just so we're all on the same page. When you say PPPs, what exactly do we mean?
So PPPs are public infrastructure that are required to be delivered through the private sector. Now, why will the private sector come in and do public infrastructure? The reason being is, first, number one, the private companies are doing this to make money. It's not charity or CSR. Yeah, they're doing this to make money. So for us in the public service is to ensure that the services which are being delivered at an affordable price, so the users can be able to afford using that infrastructure. And also we tame the private sector to ensure that they do not maximize profits and make it very unaffordable for users to use infrastructure. We've seen a big challenge, for example, in the power sector, where our power bills are extremely high. And that's because some of the contracts which are negotiated are not in favor of what do you call this? There's got a lot of fat into it. So it becomes very costly to the users. So there are two people that actually bear the cost. It's either the users or the government. Yep. So for us, our key role is to ensure that we deliver infrastructure at affordable price, and also we get quality from the from the private sector. So the role of PPPs is to deliver sustainable infrastructure to the public, leveraging on the private sector.
The private sector. So who owns the infrastructure?
So there are different PPP frameworks. So you've got a framework, for example, on a BOT where the private sector owns the infrastructure for a concession period. In the law in Kenya, the maximum period that the private sector can own that concession is 30 years. But what we do look at is we look at the returns on a project. So we ensure that if the returns are extremely high, the concession will be much shorter. Yeah. If our role is to ensure that the returns to the investor are actually they're making an acceptable rate of return that are able to deliver the infrastructure and also reduce the cost to the users. Yeah.
How are you able? Because one of the things that you said, look, the private sector is in this business to make money. The public, the government, is in this business to make life a little bit easier for Kenyans. So how do you get that spot whereby these two things balance, whereby folks can still make the money that they need to make? In a lot of cases, the private sector is still made up of Kenyan citizens. But at the same time, so we're saying here, affordable housing and things like this is necessary for Kenyans. So how then are you able to get that divide, that balance then, where folks can make money and at the same time, Kenyans can get what they need?
It's an art, I'll say this. First, number one, it goes down to the numbers. So we actually, for every project that we get involved in, we go and look at the details provided by the investors and actually break it down completely into pieces. The key components that you look at is one, the EPC cost, which is the cost to develop the project. That is a baseline. So if the EPC cost is completely out, let's say there's a lot of fat into it, it becomes unaffordable. So it's to ensure that the cost that's provided actually makes sense. So we do a lot of analysis to look at that. The second element is also the financing cost. Yeah. A big component on PPPs is actually financing, because most private sector players that participate in PPPs actually go out there to get loans. So we ensure that the loan rates that are provided, the investor is getting, we also try and facilitate to ensure that they get the least amount of financing cost. The third element is also on the tenure. The shorter tenure of a project, the more expensive your repayment is. It's, for example, like a mortgage. If you've got a mortgage for 5 years compared to a mortgage of 25 years, your repayment on a 5-year mortgage will be very expensive. So we ensure that also the
installments.
The installments, absolutely. Because the installments is what determines what the users actually do pay to use that infrastructure. So what we do is we ensure that the investor is able to leverage based on the partnership with government to access longer tenure financing. So that the users, for example, if you're looking at, let's say, for example, like a toll road, the user is able to pay an affordable rate much cheaper because of the extended tenure of financing. So there's quite a bit of work that we have to do to ensure that we deliver cost-effective infrastructure to the people.
Who does the negotiations?
So the negotiations are done between the Treasury and the Contracting Authority, as per the law, the PPP Act of 2021. So we support the Contracting Authority to deliver the most cost-effective infrastructure. In terms of, we also leverage on expertise, private sector expertise. So we work also with private sector law firms and also private sector banks, to ensure that the cost that's being put forward for government is actually well balanced.
So how can Kenya use these PPPs to spur development? We're talking about so many, development, it goes so far across that, if you threw a stone, it would land on an opportunity in terms of development in the country. So how can these actually spur development? How can you say the marriage between public and private would now see Kenya making strides then towards that development agenda?
Well, I'll start by saying that, first, number one, it's leveraging on private sector's expertise to deliver projects. Yeah. So the higher quality of infrastructure we deliver, we end up having less rework. So, for example, when you look at the road infrastructure, I remember back a while back when we used to, actually many years ago, I'll say maybe about, let's say 20 years ago, when our road infrastructure, every year there was just constant rework. To do roads. If you look at the amount of rework that is done over a period of time, you'll end up finding that we're actually spending, I'll say we're paying for Vitz, but we're getting we're paying for a Rolls Royce, but we're getting a Vitz. So it enables government actually leveraging on the private sector expertise to also one, get better quality infrastructure, but also boost the private sector to make profitability in a sustainable manner. And that also enhances the government raise revenues. It helps the government raise revenues and also private sector actually to make more profits. So if this partnership, there's a huge element on PPPs where it's a trust relationship between the public and private. And this relationship, it has to be balanced. Even a PPP where the private sector is what you call the weight is fully leaned towards the private sector will make ridiculous profits. And the users will actually suffer. And the other way around, if the government sits on the private sector, the private sector will make losses. And that relationship would not work. And remember, PPPs is a maximum of a 30-year relationship. So if there's a big requirement to ensure that both the risks are well balanced, and also the trust element between the two parties, between the private and public sector, are well respected within the tenure of the program.
Take us through the decision making on a PPP. So does it start with the private sector seeing opportunity and pitching to government or the procuring agency, and then that agency then decides, this sounds good, we can actually go this way? Or is it government that calls for expression of interest on certain area? Say the Kenya Airports Authority is thinking, well, we need more airports in the country, and we want the private sector to come in and tell us how they can help us roll out airports. And then who does the negotiation? What does your office do? Does your office have a veto on a certain direction that a contract negotiation is going? Who takes ultimate responsibility if a couple of years down the road, say the Auditor General comes and says the way this contract was actually designed and signed, it was meant to benefit the private sector player more, and it appears to have been, there were some underhand deals that were happening here. Is it Chris Kirigua that we're going to go after? So start with the beginning.
Thank you. I'll start with the point of how do these proposals come, how do we start the PPP process? There are two ways. They're solicited and unsolicited proposals we do receive. The number one process is where government has the priorities, the PPP priorities. So when you look, for example, at, I'll say this, like on the electricity sector or water sector, we've listed out the list of opportunities that we need to target under PPP. So what we'll do is we will go out there and put this information out. We'll do the feasibility studies and get, one, the commercial viability of a project and also the technical aspects of a project. The best PPPs actually are done through a competitive process. So we go to market. So we identify a project. Let's say we're doing a transmission line from here to, for example, Mombasa. We'll do the feasibility study, look at the costings and how the investor will make their money, and how the infrastructure will be delivered through the technical analysis. So that's one aspect where we go out there, we go to the market and we advertise it, and we get the best offer we get. That's what carries a weight. However, despite the offer we get, we also do a huge load amount of negotiations to ensure that the risks are well balanced. The private sector will always try to push all the risks to government, and also government will try as hard as possible to throw all the risks to the private sector. So there's a huge amount of negotiation that goes into ensure that there's a balanced approach in risk distribution. The second way that projects are delivered is through a method we can procure through a privately initiated proposal. So this is where the private sector identifies a project that can be done via PPP, does their own feasibility, does their own analysis, and gives a proposal to government. If that project is of priority to government, we will evaluate that and also award it, but we'll also go through the same rigorous process of negotiation.
So will you subject it to other bidding? This is my idea. I came to you with my idea, and then you give you that. You think it's a good idea, and then you ask City and Ndu to bid for it. It's not fair. And we go on.
There's something that we have to do. We have to also ensure that we get value for money.
Okay.
Yeah, that is a very important aspect. So, and the way we monitor value for money is there are global comparators on each project. Yeah, if you look at, for example, if we're looking at, let me go back again to the transmission line. There's a global benchmark on transmission lines, and they're global. What do you call this? The lenders also have a big responsibility to support us in being able to analyze a project and say, is this well priced to deliver for the people of Kenya? So we look at the global comparators, but if those do not make sense, we take there's a process we take called, it's a Swiss challenge. So during the Swiss challenge, we call in other bidders. Yeah, obviously the person who gave us a PIP with this innovative idea will subject them to competition. Yeah, and they'll be able to give an enhanced proposal if other bidders give a better offer.
Yeah.
However, if they don't give a better offer, it goes to the best offer. I mean, to the best person to the table table.
Recently, in the news, there has been discussion around looking at the act that brought into being parastatals, and there being a discussion about the need for privatization. It's something we looked at in the papers. In fact, the minister who heads the ministry that you belong to is quoted extensively on this particular subject. Now, the question I wanted to ask is, if I look at the list of parastatals that we were given and the percentage of government ownership in each of these, when they talk about privatization, is privatization a PPP, or does it mean we're going to sell the whole caboodle, meaning everything will be sold? So it no longer, I can no longer say, as a Kenyan, we have Kenya Meat Commission, or as a Kenya, we have Kenya Airways. Is there a difference between privatization and PPPs?
Thank you. Yes, there is a very big difference. Very big difference. So privatization is sale of government assets. Yeah. And sale of government assets is, for example, the government can decide to sell it fully or partially. Yeah. So that's privatization. PPP is project finance. Yeah. Is financing projects, different projects. Those are two different routes. The skill set done for PPPs normally is almost like a private equity skill set. Yeah. Who goes in, the way the private equity goes in and buys in stake into a company and holds it for a certain period of time, and maybe offloads it after a period of time. On a PPP, is a private sector comes in and picks up an infrastructure, develops it, and holds it for a certain period of time until they make their return, and then it transfers back to government.
While they are making their returns, the government does benefit. So why is it then that some of these parastatals cannot go into a PPP? Is there something preventing them from going into a PPP? Because they've been in existence, they seem to have been viable, otherwise they wouldn't have been set up in the first place.
Are they infrastructure?
Yes.
I mean, in order to get things done, really.
Let me put this way. Actually, it's a very interesting question and a good question. PPPs have always been seen as they're not as easy. So there are two options of funding projects. You can either get a budgetary allocation, or you do it through a PPP. Now, a PPP process is, the way I call the budgetary allocation process is almost like using a credit card. You walk into a store and walk out with something. Yeah? That's budgetary allocation. In a PPP, it's like getting a mortgage. The finances go through a rigorous process to ensure that will they be able to get back their money. Yeah? So there's a lot more work required to be able to get a PPP project to close, compared to a normal budgetary allocation. And the preference in the past, obviously, when we had any country, actually, you look at a country with a lot of resources, they would prefer to do what? Do budgetary allocation, because it's much faster, they make their own decisions, and they do not need to leverage on the private sector. Yeah? And you do not need to do as much analysis as you would in a PPP. Yeah? So always the preferred route would be to go through budgetary allocation, but where we sit right now, we've got a big constraint. We've got a big constraint on the fiscal space. We've got a big constraint also on the borrowing side. So with the current challenges, the only route available to spur development is leveraging on PPPs.
See, I'm born with a dog on this one. Yeah.
Dog with the bone.
What do I call it?
A bone with the dog.
You know what I meant. The dog is the bone and the dog are somewhere in the
Somewhere,
picture.
yes.
Yeah, but so you see, the part of the problem with parastatals is that they're government owned, and the argument has always been that really doing business isn't the government's job. Really, they're supposed to provide an enabling environment, etc., etc., etc. Now, the thing about privatization, or the thing about the private sector, is that they bring in, among other things, efficiency, serious levels of accountability, the sort of accountability that, again, anecdotally speaking, government isn't famous for. So you have this situation where it would be a marriage made in paradise, because you have the owners of the entity and the people who own the capital, that's the government. And then you bring in this no-nonsense group of people who look into details that the government may not have time to, and the profit element that the private sector is particularly good at. So, again...
So you're looking at the word private in both instances?
Yes, I am.
Because this is privatization
I've just taken private.
of a public entity.
Yes.
Privatization of a public entity versus public-private partnership.
Yes, and I'm saying that this private enterprise, you see, for there to be a sale, it means there are people who have an interest in this business and believe they can make money out of it. They're businessmen, okay? And I'm asking the question, why can't the government go into business with them? Why can't the government make money from these things also? That's a question I'm really asking.
Does the privatization law only restrict to new projects, or can it also go into the government has actually embarked on a project, and at some point, to continue operating this project, bring in the private sector, they continue investing for a certain period of time, and then they'll sell it back? Because that would be like the case. We have a public entity, a sugar factory. It's already been established. It has outgrowers. It has everything. It's a going concern. Well, maybe not. But the private sector can then come in. So can that be considered a public-private partnership?
The answer is no. Those are two different things, very different things. But I completely agree with you, Bonamuga. This is what happens. Like, for example, we're talking about privatization. It is actually about selling of the asset, bringing the private sector. The private sector brings in the efficiencies, and they're able to drive profitability within those public. Now they become parastatal. So it's 100% owned by government. Government sells some stake. It becomes a parastatal. That now becomes profitability. Profitable. The element about PPPs is about developing infrastructure. It can be new, it can be old. Yeah. So the new infrastructure, we normally call it a greenfield project. Yeah. So we come in, for example, we need to do a new port, for example. Yeah, and we bring in the private sector to develop it. That's a greenfield project. However, we can do something else on PPPs, which is a brownfield project. And the brownfield project is whereby government has already spent money to develop some infrastructure. And we've got one transaction, actually a dump transaction, water dump transaction that we're looking at, that the government spent approximately close to 20 billion to develop it. And we're looking to bring in a private sector to take it on. The government gets back some of that money, yeah, and the private sector operates the infrastructure.
The damn thing.
The private sector operates the dam for approximately for a concession period. Now, what does that do for the country? Government immediately raises revenue.
Sure.
Yeah, it gets back. Let's say
its 20B,
the
maybe
20B
15 or 10,
and could be with a profit also.
Okay.
Yeah, so it gets back some money, is able to do more dams. Yeah, or do other social infrastructure, social infrastructure, and that's why we've been lacking. Because what's been happening is government has been doing a lot of development of infrastructure, which could have actually been done by the private sector. Yeah, but also not focused as much on, for example, education, hospitals, where leveraging on those funds, those are not very commercially driven opportunities. Yeah, so government, that's where we should be putting the money. And since this, obviously, the change of administration happened recently, I'm sure you see every weekend His Excellency is talking about PPPs.
Yep.
Yeah. And PPP, this is a story we should have actually started 20 years ago. Yeah, because if we had PPPs running, driving all this infrastructure, government would have actually had a significant amount of fiscal space to do.
So more money could have come now to help us in doing hospitals and schools and such.
Absolutely.
Now we are spending a lot of money building roads, and yet we should be. Anyway, let's take a break. It's 27 minutes to 8. Christopher Kirigua is the Director General of the Public-Private Partnerships Directorate at the National Treasury and Economic Planning. He's here to tell us how the country can benefit from PPPs to spur economic growth. Time for us to take that break. We'll be back shortly after we take a look at the weather. Is your machine working? Your machine is now working.
One can only
Okay, we can do a PPP for this machine.
I think it's necessary.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
So, Chris, former president goes to France, signs a bilateral agreement with the government of France. And then among those things is also a project that is to expand the road between Rironi and Mau Summit, several hundred kilometers, and make that into a toll road in a PPP framework. New administration comes, and the first thing we're hearing from Kipchumba Murkomen is that thing, forget it. Forget what's happening, and why would that be like that?
I'll say the challenges of the road Nakuru Summit. Let me start the challenges. It's a much needed infrastructure. Yeah, you constantly see, like even during the Christmas holidays when people were going back home, yeah, the roads were super congested. So the infrastructure is much needed. Yeah, the challenge with Nakuru Summit, the PPP concession, was the question of affordability. There were two aspects: question of affordability and question of alternative roads. Yeah, so the current concession did not envision an alternative road. So meaning anyone using that infrastructure will have to pay the tolls. Yeah, so it becomes very prohibitive to Kenyans. The second aspect was on the affordability aspect. The estimated cost to use a toll one way, the road one way, on a small car was costing close to 1,000 shillings. Yeah.
From where to where?
Just to use a toll road, the 175
From
kilometers. Yeah,
to
Mau
the
Summit.
end.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's
One way.
One way. Yeah. And when you look at
171 kilometers.
75
175 kilometers.
kilometers.
1,000 bob.
1,000 bob.
Well, we are paying 370 for 227 kilometers.
Is it 200? 27.
27 kilometers,
Yeah.
yes. And we are paying 300 and close to 400 bob.
Yeah. But there's an alternative.
Okay.
There is an alternative because on the expressway you can go down.
You can use
without
the other.
without an alternative, it becomes
Prohibitively
very
expensive.
Very prohibitively and expensive. Yeah. So what we had to do with the partner, it's about looking for solutions to drive the cost down. Yeah. And the biggest aspect that drove that cost extremely high was the EPC cost, and is to look at also the spec, the configuration of the road. Was it too highly spec'd? Yeah. So that's some piece of work that.
Could you just pause for a second?
Sure.
And explain normal spec, medium size spec, and over spec.
And the go-go's.
Yes, and over spec, so that we just understand. Yes.
Now, Bonamuga, allow me not to get into that detail because I'm a financer.
Right.
So in terms of
Not the engineer.
okay. Over spec, then it means a road needs certain specifications.
indeed.
Now, at what point do you go into overdrive with the specifications? That's what I'm asking.
Okay, that's a good question. So what happens is during the feasibility study, yeah. Sometimes when you're doing the feasibility study, and also when you put in the specifications required for the road, sometimes you put in all the bells and whistles. Yeah. So you can put in, instead of putting streetlights, you can have chandeliers on the road. Yeah. So and it takes it completely off. The cost. So it's to look at the aspects of how the specifications were put together. Yeah, and is there room for us to look at ways to either scale it down so that we can make it much more affordable? But also the bigger aspect was to look at the EPC cost. If this project was looked at, if we're able to get into negotiation, especially on the EPC cost, which is the cost of the construction, 2 years ago, I believe would have found some savings. The challenge is with where the world is right now, commodity prices have gone extremely high. Lending costs have also gone extremely high. I remember LIBOR, the rate of lending in borrowing in the US for the dollar, the LIBOR rate was about 0.2%. It's now close to 5%. Yeah, so that cost goes directly to the project, and the users will need to pay for that. So the challenge is that the CS of responsible for roads that he has highlighted are real challenges, because you look at, would people be willing to spend 1,000 shillings to go one way to the to go back home? Those are part of the challenges.
If they're not willing, they have nowhere else to go. That's a challenge. How was it then signed? If you talk about all those things, so was there feasibility study conducted? Was proper costing? And you said viability, commercial viability. Was commercial viability conducted? Was a social impact study conducted? How did we arrive into signing a PPP that we look back and you're like, glaring issues are emerging? And where were you?
So where was I? At that time, I was actually seated down at Standard Chartered Bank. I was leading sustainable finance for Africa and Middle East, and living the private sector life. I was like you. So no, when I joined, it was one of the big things that we actually looked at. Yeah, so we had to get into the depth of the project, and we worked very well with concession partners. They're actually very good partners. If you look at the consortium, the freight consortium, they're one of the best companies that you can actually get into on a PPP. So,
what makes them that good?
They are known globally for many projects. They do airports. They've done roads all over. Actually, they do roads across the world, even in other countries in Europe. Yeah, so they've got a very good, strong track record. Yeah,
and in the third world, they also have a good track record.
I'll say Kenya was actually their pilot. Kenya was a pilot on PPPs, and this project is actually so strategic because it was going to actually unlock many PPP opportunities, not just in Kenya, into many other countries.
So which means they should give us a discount.
I think Wanamuga, we're going to leverage on your expertise. We'll bring you to the negotiation room.
So you come into office, Chris, and this is among the things that you start looking at and start saying, okay, can we reopen this? Can we have conversations and renegotiations? How did that go?
It went very well, I think, at the beginning, because the risk was going. It was actually aligned to. It was tilted to government. So in case there's a shortfall, the government will have to pay the difference. Yeah. So that liability that was going to go to government is what actually created a big challenge. Yeah. And there's a wider team within the Treasury. So we've got my colleague who's in debt. If this contingent liability materializes, it needs to be booked under debt. Yeah, we need to borrow to
bridge the gap.
To bridge the gap. So when we looked at it within Treasury, we saw the gaps, and we had to have the tough conversations with the concession partners. They are currently working, hopefully, to come up with a solution. Yeah. And when I spoke to them last week, they said there's some solutions they're looking at to try help Kenya government bridge that gap. If that happens, it's a very good transaction. Yeah, but also the element we're not touching on is the alternative. Yeah, an alternative has to be given, and there are also solutions that they're discussing to hopefully provide an alternative for the road.
So in such cases, the procuring agency is the Kenya National Highways Authority.
Indeed.
So they're the ones who, they know roads, they know the need for roads, they understand everything that's required. Okay, this is not a question to you, it's a question to you, CT.
Yes, please.
Do you think the people who actually sat and negotiated these things should be called aside and asked, how do you get into such a contract?
They should actually.
How do you actually say you are in charge of roads in the country? You're getting into another contract where there's no alternative being provided. You're looking at the kind of cost. You're looking at the kind of risk that you're exposing the government to. All those kind of questions. This is not to you, Chris. This is to CT.
You know the whistles and the chandeliers that the Director General mentioned come to mind. If you actually have a peek preview of what was supposed to be on this Super Express highway, okay, what was supposed to have been there, the things they should have done, not which I was privy to, but what we were told, and what wasn't done, and yet it was costed. And when certain things weren't done, the next thing we heard was that some more budgetary allocation had been given so that these things can be finished.
Yeah.
You see, it is these things that raise the question. Long after we have the Super Express highway working, you still don't have walkways, you still don't have bus stops, there are places where you don't have streetlights, and they existed before.
Yeah.
So I'm simply saying that it's that thinking. This, for me, exemplifies the thinking around the question you've just asked. Somebody comes up with what they know they need to, because these are engineers, they know exactly what needs to be done. They do know. But I get biblical on this note. To him who knows what is right and does not do it, to him or her it is sin. So why is it that they who are trained are charged with this responsibility? Why then don't they do this thing that they know? Because here we have an alternative.
Clear.
Rickety and the potholes, no problem, but it's there.
Okay. Chris?
Can I come in?
Yes.
I'll say this first in terms of, let me start with the PPPs. PPPs also globally have good track records and also very bad track records. Yeah, and part of the challenge is that expertise did not exist. Yeah,
Which expertise?
delivering PPPs in this country.
On
It didn't.
structuring the PPP.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that didn't exist. So it's whereby, and that's why actually I came in to the public service, is that expertise can be built, but was not there. Yeah. So when they got into those contracts, it's not they did not know at they did not look at the contract end to end. They did not understand the financial implications at that time. And right now we're very aligned, extremely aligned with Kenya. Because even Kenya knows very well that the costings are a challenge. Yeah. But there's an aspect you've touched on, which is project management, which we've been actually extremely poor at. Yeah. Because when we deliver this infrastructure, we need to project manage it and look at if this is what was agreed, are we getting that? Yeah. So one thing we've developed a monitoring evaluation team, and the monitoring evaluation team actually monitors what was stated, what was negotiated. Is that what has been delivered? Okay. Yeah. And that needs to be delivered. Remember, it's a 30-year concession, for example.
Yep.
For a 30-year concession, the guys who are going to be there 15 years from today are not the ones who negotiated.
Yep.
Yeah. So you need to put in proper documentation. Yeah. And also a procedure, and also with a calendar that everyone knows. After, let's say, after year 2, this is what they're supposed to do. After year 7, there's a major maintenance required, for example.
Yes.
Yeah. And also in terms of the social impact, which you touched on. During a very good feasibility study touches just not on the social impact, also the environmental impact as infrastructure brings to the table. It is our role in public service to monitor what was agreed will be delivered. So a big aspect is this. When you look at, for example, tax waivers, yeah, investors come in and say, we're going to hire 300,000 people. Good story, yeah?
Yeah.
Very good story.
Provide 300,000 jobs.
Now, do we do KPIs to monitor was that actually achieved? And if they're not achieved, are you paying us now the taxes because you did not achieve your targets? Are we getting a discount? Are we sharing the upside and the downside?
Are we?
Yeah. Sorry?
Are we?
I was asking a question.
We take that ball and we
So
throw
is
it
that
back
what
into
you're
your
saying now
courts.
that should be
Is that what should be
in the project
thing?
management and M&E?
That is exactly what we've put in.
But how do
Okay.
we excuse Kenya for an absence or a lack of expertise? They don't need to have the expertise. If they found you, how long have you been in this country?
In Kenya,
Yes,
46 years.
precisely. So it means you are here all along. If they didn't have the expertise to negotiate these PPPs,
They could have gone to Stanchart, Middle East, found Chris.
that's the point I'm trying to make. Because it's like this story of project financing vis-a-vis the money we've borrowed, and as people argue, we've leveraged the port. It's not the port that has been leveraged.
And you see, Chris,
You need to understand how that aspect of financing actually works. Now, if someone doesn't know it, it doesn't mean that they don't have to know it. Somebody else might know it. Why don't they just do the needful and go and find out who knows this thing better than they do?
And I think that's what government did. And that's why I joined government. So I think it's a starting point. And when you look at, for example, even on transactions, in the past, transactions, even the legal requirement, the legal support, would never. A few transactions did not actually leverage on external counsel. Yeah. Right now on PPPs, any transaction we work on, we bring in external counsel too, over and above the AG's office, obviously, who support us.
Yeah.
But we work jointly. What happens is when you bring in, for example, external counsel, they're able to give you benchmarks of how these transactions were structured in other markets. Yeah. So even though you're doing, for example, like an ICT project that's going to be fast, Kenya is going to be the first country to implement it in Africa, the same project has been done elsewhere. You need to bring someone on the table who's been able to see it delivered in other markets.
Sure. Because these things that we speak of today, we speak of PPPs and we talk about the local authorities then that have been given the responsibility to entrench them, Kenha, etc., isn't it?
Absolutely.
The project management issue seems to be the one that is, sticking out like a sore thumb, because then we have certain mechanics then, unfortunately, that have not been finished. And so the question is, why does that happen perennially here? We are not, or Kenya is not the only nation on the globe to operate through the PPP model. There are countries that have PPPs flying all over the place. For roads, for building, it's everywhere and everything is tolled. You use a road, you pay for it. But it's finished to perfection. It's completed to perfection. It has been managed and it continues to be managed for the length of the project. Why, in your opinion? And it could be a softer issue, not a less important one, but in terms of subject, it could be softer. That is it a people problem as opposed to a project problem? And if it is, then how can we start to chip away at that block and say this thing can actually be fixed? If we are truly saying that PPPs could be the answer to development in Kenya, it's beyond the brick and mortar. It goes beyond that. It goes towards, how about somebody not seeing that this is an opportunity for me to benefit? How about somebody seeing that I'm actually contributing towards making sure, proverbially, that Kenya is a better place? How do we deal with those soft issues?
Okay. Let me say this first. I don't think it's a people issue. Yeah, it's not a people issue. Everyone who I met at the directorate, at the treasury, I've likely maybe less than 3 people are new people. It's still the same team. But they're able to do this. They're able to structure these projects and look at the governance aspect. Yeah. A big element is that I saw when I joined public service. It was almost like a roadblock. Someone will tell you what cannot be done as opposed to what needs to be done to unlock
the blocks,
the challenges. Yeah, and you asked actually the first questions Eric asked me, how has it been? And I've said it's actually been great, because you're able to if you're able to get things done in the public sector, you're able to achieve. There's much more gratitude.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, so it's not a people issue. The people are good. Yeah. But I think the key aspect that needs to be there is a governance aspect and also good leadership. Yeah.
Who's a leader? A person?
We're all responsible for that. It's actually so if PPP fails, I'll take full accountability to it. So when you look at just this month, just January we've cleared a few projects, and hopefully by the end of February we'll have another 5 projects. Cleared. Yeah, we've done a huge amount of work to structure water PPPs.
Okay.
Yeah. On the water side, the water sector PPPs, we've put together a water purchase agreement, a draft water purchase agreement, that investors will be able to come into the country, look at it, and be able to see what kind of contract they'll be getting into. And this is whereby we've balanced the risks between the private sector and the public sector, private and public, in a very balanced approach.
Sure.
And also we've leveraged on global expertise in doing this. The second aspect is, like when you look at the water sector, someone might say it's very easy to do water sector PPPs. It's actually not. However, there are so many solutions to unlock the challenges in the sector. Yeah. When you look at, for example, Nairobi, we've got non-revenue water of approximately 46%, call it 50%.
Yeah.
So every liter for every liter that you produce, you lose 50% of water. Now, can that be fixed? The answer is absolutely yes. There are PPPs that are done for non-revenue water. And how do you get non-revenue water? Non-revenue water is brought in about by either lack of meters, leakages in the system, theft, and also vandalism. Yeah. So to fix this system, and also governance, by the way, governance is also a very big aspect. Yeah, because non-revenue water is you sell water, but you're not making it. It's lost. Yeah. So we're putting in place, for example, a PPP for the key counties to minimize non-revenue water. So to take it from the high levels of close to 50% to below 20% levels. Yeah. Now, water companies become profitable by doing that. Now, so how long does it take? It takes about 3 years to sort out non-revenue water. Yeah. It takes about 3 years to develop a dam. Yeah. So by the time you start fixing the broken infrastructure, and
The dam is complete.
the dam is complete, and now the project becomes bankable. But these processes need to start simultaneously. Yeah, it's once again, actually, you said it very well. It's project management. Yeah, but now we have a responsibility because as Treasury, we're the ones who take the hit. Yeah, we need to allocate resources if this doesn't work. Yeah, so we've got a big responsibility to ensure that the contracting authorities in the different sectors also manage the projects well.
And if they don't, you take them to court, or who does?
No, I think,
Someone will tell you, najua Chris umenipata hapa.
and you will leave us here.
Tumeona wengi.
No, I think we each have a responsibility.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a role for the Auditor General, and to ensure that the governance is put in, it's in place.
Please don't forget there's a role for Parliament.
And there's a role for Parliament too.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Chris, thank you very much. 1 hour is a short time. Still a lot to discuss. There's you, in fact, explaining the water PPPs. There's you telling us the potential of, the PPPs, especially to unlocking the potential in our counties. There's a lot. So this is an open invitation. Come again soon.
Asante sana.
Say yes.
Asante sana. I will come back. Just to let you know, in terms of the one thing I haven't touched on is the opportunity size. We're looking at all sectors in PPPs. So we start from ICT. You spoke about Galana. We also have a private investor who's shown interest in Galana. We've got, so agriculture is big for us. We've got obviously roads, ports. We're looking at all sectors, water in the economy, transmission lines. We've got opportunities in excess of $10 billion.
Whoa, that's huge.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Come again soon.
Asante.